Okay, hold on. Okay, hello. So I just got back. Well, not just got back. I got back maybe an hour ago from watching Avatar: The Way of Water. I think that's the name. And I watched it with my family, with my dad, my aunt, my cousin, and my sister. And it was amazing. It was so amazing. Um, I this isn't like a review. This is just I'm talking about it and then I might just talk about other stuff, but in case you find this video and you're looking for a review, this has spoilers, so sorry about that, but it was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful movie film. It's a masterpiece, honestly. I was saying to my sister in the car that it's one of the best sequels I've ever seen. I remember seeing Avatar when I was younger for the first time in theaters. We saw it, I think, at the Ontario Science Center. I think we saw it in IMAX. I don't remember fully, completely. Maybe that was Planet of the Apes. I don't know. But I remember watching it, and I remember being in love with it then, and wondering when it was gonna come back for the sequel, and then kind of moving on, and then when it started to pick up again that there was gonna be a sequel, I was excited. And I've noticed that there's, in this day and age, which I also talk about a lot with my sister, people love to hate, just like group hate on things, especially things that other people have loved in the past. And so Avatar, I feel like, picked up some of that critique. And I was saying that I think it's just people's protective instincts, like they're defending themselves from being hurt by like a sequel sucking. So they're just like trying to like hate it off top. But it was phenomenal. And it was very, very emotional for me to watch. It was hard. It was very hard to watch at certain points, but it was such a beautiful film. And it was so well done. And I'm so glad that James Cameron and everyone who was part of creating that story and part of creating the first story took the time that they took, because they ended up creating something that I think is very powerful and very moving, especially in the current wave of films that we've seen that have like a social political context underneath it, some type of commentary, especially when we're talking about white supremacy and things like that, and the effects of colonialism, racism, whatever, all that stuff on the planet, on each other. um, it's really moving to me, and I hate to do comparison, but I have to, because I saw Black Panther, Wakanda Forever a few weeks ago, and I hated that, to be completely honest. It was moving in a completely different way. It was extremely triggering in a completely different context, in a horrible way, and it was extremely, in my opinion, disrespectful and exploitive and disturbing and disgusting, and an insult to not only black people, but I think to the indigenous people of the region that they were pulling from for the opposite, the opposing, like the enemy in that film. It was disrespectful to ancestors in general. They kept invoking the name ancestor and did no honoring to it. It was disrespectful to the earth. It was just disrespectful. I really don't like that film. So I did not enjoy Wakanda Forever. But it was hard for me not to compare, because watching Avatar, they just they did so well. They did so well. They honored in my opinion, they honored the experience of indigenous peoples across the world, across all experiences of life, in terms of not fitting into that stereotypical casting of being passive, and of just letting go of their land and of their sovereignty. There was a maintaining of this anger and a validation of the anger. And through the fight scenes, we got to see so much justice. Like, usually when there's battle scenes and it's between like a group of color and white people, they never go that hard, because I don't know what it is, but I think white people struggle to see themselves get beaten. And so we never actually get to see like some real brutality. But in Avatar, the woman, I can't remember her name, but the mother, and she was in the first film. She was so good and so brutal and so cutthroat, and I loved it. And she stood her ground and she didn't need a gun. And I loved it. I loved her anger. I loved that it was maintained. I loved that it was fierce. I loved that it was very, very felt and very potent. And I loved that there was no trying to soften it. There was no trying to get her to, have some type of sympathy. They didn't ask her to sacrifice any of herself. And I find that that is something that, filmmakers or storytellers are doing a lot these days when they're trying to tell like some type of justice story, where like the people of color are supposed to be rising up and blah, blah, blah. They always, downplay it. They water it out. They make it so that it's more digestible for the people who would be uncomfortable, who should be uncomfortable watching that. And in this case, they didn't do that. James Cameron didn't do that. And I was really, really, really happy with that. I was so happy that most of the film was about getting to explore the different culture that they were getting introduced to, because they were meeting people who were from a different part of the world that they're in. And so, they were from the forest and these people are from the sea. So it's a different culture. It's a different way of being. There's different practices, different traditions. And most of the film was spent exploring that rather than fighting. And I really appreciated that as well, because it really lessened the amount of trauma that had to be witnessed, and it really gave a backbone to the people. It made the people actually be a living, breathing group and community and being, rather than just making us kind of have all of our assumptions based off of the way that indigenous people have just generally been characterized and morphed into a monolith and just like, okay, this is what they are based off of all of our preconceived notions. No, instead we got to see who they are. We got to experience them. They became real. They became human, and viewing everything through a human lens, though I understand that they're not human. This is Pandora, but they became real rather than just this fictitious, character playing this role of like the poor, pitiful people who get oppressed. They had life within them, and it was very, very important for me to see that. And it was just so beautiful. There's just so many parts where I was just so happy, but it was also really hard to watch, and it was very emotional, and I was crying on and off pretty much from the first hour. Like after the first hour and on, it was tear central. And I think that that's just because it was hard. I'm one of those people who grew up I was in middle school and early, I guess all of high school. So I was in like late middle school and high school when Black Lives Matter was like at its peak in the good part. So I would say the good era was like 2012 to like 2015 is when I was really in it. And it was very triggering, that film. So it brought me back to that initial experience of understanding, just like of really beginning to understand just what it meant to not be white, in a world that is guided by white people, and beginning to understand the cruelty, beginning to understand the violence, and beginning to understand the loss that accompanies white power. And it was very hard, and I have never watched anything since I've been that age. I've never experienced the emotions that I experienced during that period of history and during that period of my life with, that was around Trayvon Martin and Sandra Bland. During that period of my life, I've felt the most hatred and most disgust and most cruelty. And I felt the most just beaten down and the most hopeless in terms of looking towards the outside world and just feeling so much rage. And it took a very long time to heal from that and let it go and move on. And not hold that against anybody and hold that against any group of people, and just realize that it's not, you have to keep going. And so I am not super heavy in political activism anymore. And I've just kind of like, the burnout was very real. And since then, I've just kind of stayed in the corners that I find bring joy and where I can bring joy to other people as well and bring healing in other ways. But I realized very quickly that all of that social activism, especially on social media and all of that, for me, it doesn't do much. And it's just kind of heartbreaking over and over again. And so it's not very easy to bring me back to a place of experiencing that intensity of emotion and sadness and rage. Honestly, I don't get triggered that deeply by anything because after you've lived through something like that, you've kind of seen it all. And especially with social media and with Twitter especially, and what we were open to, what we became aware of, and all of the atrocities, it was just kind of like you just become numb. So it's not easy to get me back into a place of that deep anger. It's mostly I can be at the surface with things because it's kind of like, it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. But that movie took me there in a way that I really needed, and I didn't realize I needed it. And it was so cathartic to be able to sit there and cry and be so emotional and be so angry and be so hurt, and not feel judged by that, and not feel like, okay, I need to shut this down, okay, I need to calm down, okay, but see their humanity, understand that it's not, this isn't their fault, the system, and blah, blah. There was no trying to silence any of the anger. There was no trying to silence any of the emotions that were coming up. It was supported. I feel like the film supported everybody feeling that emotions and letting the rage just sit there. And it was so special, and it was so, I don't know, it was just very important. It was very significant to me, and I don't know. I cried a lot. I cried a lot, and I was so angry, and it was kind of a spiritual experience because I was sitting there, and especially I think the part that really began to trigger me was watching the way that they would do, the way that they would fish for, hunt for those whales, those big whales, and the way that they would basically be taking their soul or their spirit and putting it in a vial to stop aging for human beings. And that was really like, yeah, but watching that and watching like them target the mother because she's not going to leave her calf, and those types of that storyline, and watching that really brought up emotions for me around just everything, I guess. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so emotional. Well, it's good. It is what it is, and that's how a movie's very special. But I realized that just living in this world, it's very easy to watch bad things happen to people at this point because it's just I've become so desensitized and so numb to watching my own people be hurt and watching people in general suffer. So it's not as triggering watching, the people, fighting and battling versus watching the creatures, because it's, I don't know, I think that part of the evilness and one of the main tactics of white supremacy and just, what white people have done is making, humanity and making human beings so separate from every other life form that, we are just completely isolated. And so all of our experiences become isolated, and it's hard to find your way back to that root connection that we see explored between the sea people and the whales, and like how they call them like their spirit sisters or spirit brothers. Like there's that same innate connection between animals and between the earth and people. And I think watching those whales and watching that hunting scene and seeing what they take from them connected me back to that experience of being young and alive and so angry during that time of history with between 2012 and 2015 with Black Lives Matter. And it was so hard to experience that emotionally, but it was also really beautiful because I realized how much had been trapped and had been I had just forced down and tried to get myself to no longer feel and no longer be angry because I didn't want to be, but it was so cathartic. It was something that needed to be healed, and I needed to let it breathe. I needed to let it go, and I was able to do that through connecting to the heart in this film. And that's why I also really appreciated the way that they intertwined, the nature with the people and understanding that they are one, and especially with the element of water, understanding that, we're all connected, we're all one ecosystem, and so we all feel for each other. And when one of these creatures are harmed, it's like harming your own family, it's like harming yourself. And same with when the land is harmed. And I just really appreciated the way that they honored that, because it just felt, I don't know, it was just really, really special. It was really special, and yeah, it was just such a beautiful film, honestly. And I kind of am I feel ridiculous for being so emotional, but this is very reflective of how I was in the theater, except I was actually really crying. And it was such a roller coaster because it was so strange because my mind was going places that really didn't have anything to do with the film at hand, but ultimately had everything to do with it, which is what I think is so special, because I just really appreciate that the storytellers of this film did not, they told the truth, and they really honored the truth rather than, these assumptions around who we are and what they think should have happened. Or it just felt very honest. I don't know what to say. It just felt very true, very, very honest, very real, and every part of it. And I just really appreciated, like I said, the things that really dominated for me was the mother and her anger, everybody's anger. And I understood every perspective. I understood why the father wanted to just keep running and protecting his family and trying to, just get people to understand that you can't fight these people. But then I also really appreciated that they didn't just make these indigenous people just like these passive people, like I said, and instead showed their fight, showed their resistance. It's really important that we see narratives like that, especially, and I loved that. It was just so special to me to see them also fighting with what they had versus, the invaders that were fighting with their guns and their bombs. And, I appreciated that they also, used their own weapons against them as well. But I did love to see them fighting with what they had, and that being enough, and not having to, completely adopt their way of life in order to fight back and win. And I thought that it was is poignant the right word, or I thought that it was reflective of another truth that, the son, one of the sons ends up dying. Sorry, spoiler alert. One of the sons ends up dying, or one of the, I already said it. One of the sons ends up dying, and it's only after he picked up a gun, and that's not to say that it was his fault, but I'm just looking at the themes. But it's after he picked up the gun that he dies from a bullet wound. And I thought that was significant because, one of the things that they were talking about in the story was how they're the Taratora, these whales, they're nonviolent, and they haven't always been that way, but they're not fighter whales. And they are that way because they realize that killing only leads to more killing. And the one of the sons was trying to explain, was connecting with this other whale that had been isolated, and he was kind of out on his own because the other whales had assumed that he had done something that he hadn't done. But anyways, it was like it was complicating violence and complicating killing, and understanding that they exist in different realms based on intention and based on based on context. And so the context around weapons like guns and bombs and things like that, it's very different than the weapons that that the indigenous people were fighting with, and the creatures that they had, that they were connecting with, and battling with against the invaders. And so in that sense, when they did engage with the guns, that killing led to more killing of oneself. But it didn't happen with the spears, and it didn't happen with their other weapons. And I thought that kind of was significant, but I don't want to go too deep into that because I don't want to make it seem as if I believe that son, if he hadn't picked up the thing, that he wouldn't have, because obviously that's not fair, and that doesn't take into account any nuance. But that was just something that I had noticed and that I thought was interesting. And I loved that the daughter, Kiri, or I can't remember any of their names, but she's the daughter of Sojourner Weaver. I can't remember her name. She's the adopted daughter of the father and the mother, whose names I also can't remember. But she has gifts, and her gifts connect with the earth. And I'm thinking that she's kind of like because we were like all wondering who her dad is, and I kind of think she doesn't have a dad. I feel like she was gifted, and like almost like an immaculate conception. Like I feel like that's what it. That's what I think. That's what her gift is. Like she's half like indigenous or of the forest people, and then half like of the earth. I don't know, not earth, but or maybe, I don't know, just of like of spirit. I don't know what it is that she would be connected to, but I don't know if she has a dad. I was wondering about that. Yeah, that film was really, really awesome. It was so awesome. It felt like justice. It felt so good. It hurt so bad, but it felt really good. And I was also glad to see that like it wasn't all about destruction of all like the lands and the death of all these people. Like, like we got to see their land and got to see the different cultures and the practices and the people, and that like the aliveness of the people, of the indigenous people and of Pandora dominated the film rather than the destruction of it, rather than the death of it. And I really, really appreciated that. I really, really appreciated that they focused on keeping it alive. They focused on centering its aliveness. And that was so special to me because we don't get to see that very often. Thinking about Wakanda forever. And I will just talk about it just really quick because one of the reasons why I despise that film is because I think that it was very disrespectful that they chose to use the Atlantic Ocean specifically because of the Middle Passage and the way that so much death took place in the Atlantic Ocean, not only because of slavery, but then in that film. And the way, I can't even remember everything anymore because I was going to talk about it, but then I chose not to because I was just so angry. I was so angry and I was so hurt that I didn't think I would be able to make a video about it without doing too much and saying things that I would maybe regret. Because at the end of the day, artists are very sensitive beings, and it's very hard to put your creation out into the world, and I don't take that for granted. And so I also don't know what's happening in anybody's mind. So I don't know if, things are malicious or not, but just to say, as somebody who does descend from people who have lived, survived, been killed by slavery, it was a very, very negatively triggering movie to watch, and it was not a good experience watching Black Panther Wakanda Forever. For me, I know that not everybody feels that way, but I really didn't enjoy that film, and I really, really did not enjoy that film. So I'll just say that. Um, yeah, I really didn't like that film. But anyways, there's so many special parts about the film, about Avatar. It's just it was also very honest. It was very honest in terms of reflecting who led the invaders, because me and my sisters have also been talking about how there's this trend right now in Hollywood in casting to put black people in positions of power and to put them as mean people. It's happened in Wednesday, that new show Wednesday, the black girl, she's a mean girl. It's in so many different shows, but I can't remember because once I see that, I just choose not to watch it because it's triggering, and I feel like they're purposely trying to trigger us at this point, so I'm trying not to engage too often. But I really appreciated that they didn't do that in this film, because it's like they would put like a black person as like the military general, or like as one of the bad guys, like leading the squadron out to go kill a bunch of people. And it's like, no, that is not reflective of the truth, and don't do that. Especially when you're doing fantasy and sci-fi, because so many of us, we all know that fantasy and sci-fi end up often reflecting the truth. And it's not cool to warp history that way and make it seem as if it's not exactly who it actually is leading these terrorism movements and these oppressive forces, so don't lie. And that's always what pisses me off when watching a lot of action and combat films and a lot of social commentary stuff these days is they're not being honest, and I just don't understand that. It's very annoying. But anyways, I appreciated that James Cameron didn't do that, and all the people who worked on the film. I feel bad that I only know his name, because I'm imagining that so many people contributed to the creation of that film, and it was so good. It was so good. I honestly recommend it to everyone. I really, really recommend it to everyone. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful film, and yeah. I really love it. I really, really, really loved it. I'm looking at the cast now. Okay, so Kiri is played by Sojourner Weaver. I was wondering that. Okay, well, now that I see that, I'm wondering if she's like a reincarnation of her. Like, you know how they're in Jurassic Park, the girl her mom is they're not twins. They're like, she's like a clone, but not really. She's her own separate person. But she had her without a father. I'm wondering if that's the same with that storyline, which will be interesting because now we've seen two storylines like that in different movies, which I think is cool. It was such a good film. It was such a good film. I really, honestly, I'm just looking at the cast right now. Oh, I just really, really, really appreciate that film. I do. And I'll probably just keep saying that. But I just wanted to come on here and share how I felt, because this movie made me feel I was just so affected. I was honestly so affected by this film, and in such a positive and beautiful way. And it's very meaningful to me. It's very meaningful. I think they did an incredible job, and the acting was amazing. Zoe Saldana killed it. She was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, well, anyways, I'm gonna go. So, thank you. Okay, bye.